The message came through every communication channel humanity had ever built. It appeared on military screens, civilian broadcasts, personal devices, and even the old satellite networks that most people had forgotten existed. The transmission was impossible to ignore, and that was exactly the point. A massive figure filled the screens across human space. The alien stood at least 9 feet tall, covered in what looked like natural armor plating that gleamed under harsh lighting. 4 powerful arms crossed over its chest in a gesture that somehow translated perfectly across species. This was a being that expected obedience. "I am Admiral Vexthal of the Croventhi Empire," the creature announced. Its voice was deep and resonant, translated instantly by technology humanity didn't fully understand. "Your species occupies 17 star systems that belong to the Empire by right of superior strength. You have 10 solar cycles to evacuate these worlds and retreat to your origin planet. This is your only warning. Refuse and your species will be eliminated." The transmission ended as abruptly as it began, leaving billions of humans staring at blank screens in shocked silence. On Earth, in a fortified bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Jake Morrison watched the replay for the 3rd time. The command center around him buzzed with activity as officers scrambled to assess the situation. Holographic displays showed star maps, fleet positions, and rapidly updating intelligence reports. "How big is their fleet?" Morrison asked without taking his eyes off the screen. Colonel Lisa Grant stepped forward, her tablet glowing with fresh data. "Initial scans show approximately 40,000 warships, sir. They're holding position just outside our furthest colony system. The fleet stretches across millions of kilometers of space." Morrison finally turned to face his second-in-command. Lisa was young for her rank, barely 35, but she had earned her position through 3 colonial conflicts and more simulation hours than anyone else in the service. If she looked worried, that meant something. 40,000, Morrison repeated. "And we have 812 combat-capable vessels, sir. Another 300 in various stages of construction or refit." Someone in the back of the room swore quietly. Morrison couldn't blame them. The numbers were absurd. 50 to 1 odds, and that was being generous with humanity's ship count. "What do we know about the Croventhi Empire?" Morrison asked the room at large. Commander Paul Stevens cleared his throat. He was the intelligence division chief, a nervous man who looked like he should be teaching at a university, rather than briefing military commanders on alien threats. "They control roughly 300 star systems across the Andromeda sector, sir. They've been the dominant power in this region for approximately 3,000 years. 3,000 years, Morrison said softly. "That's a long time to be in charge." "Yes, sir. Our analysis suggests they've conquered or absorbed at least 40 different species during that time. Most surrendered without significant resistance once they saw the size of the Croventhi fleet." "Smart species," someone muttered. Morrison walked slowly around the holographic display, studying the tactical information from every angle. The Croventhi fleet was positioned in a traditional formation, the kind military historians would call classical or by the book. Ships arranged in neat geometric patterns, capital vessels in the center, smaller craft forming protective screens around them. It was the formation of a force that expected to intimidate, not to fight. "Lisa, pull up our wargame records from the last 20 years, Morrison ordered. "I want to see every scenario where we faced a numerically superior force." Lisa worked quickly, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Dozens of files appeared floating in the air around them. Each one represented a training exercise, a simulation where human commanders had faced impossible odds and tried to find a way to win anyway. "Sir, with respect, those were training exercises," Paul said carefully. "The Croventhi are a real threat with real weapons. We can't trick them with simulation parameters." Morrison smiled, and several officers in the room recognized that expression. It was the look their general got when he saw something others had missed. "Paul, how long did you say the Croventhi have been the dominant power in this sector?" 3,000 years, sir. "And in that time, how many wars have they fought against peer opponents? Against enemies with similar technology and training?" Paul consulted his tablet, scrolling through intelligence reports. "None, sir. Every species they encountered was significantly less advanced. Most battles lasted less than a day before the opposition surrendered." "Exactly." Morrison turned to face the room. "The Croventhi have been bullying primitives for 3 millennia. They've forgotten what real war looks like, but we haven't. We've spent the last 500 years fighting each other. Humans versus humans with comparable technology, comparable training, and comparable motivation. We've turned warfare into a science. But the numbers, sir, Lisa objected. Even if we're better trained, we can't fight 40,000 ships with 800. No, we can't, Morrison agreed. Not in a straight fight. Not in the kind of battle they're expecting. So we're not going to give them that battle. He gestured to the holographic display, zooming in on the Croventhi fleet formation. Look at this. They're not even trying to hide. They're sitting out there in perfect formation, waiting for us to either surrender or come to them. That's not military strategy. That's theater. They're trying to scare us into submission. It's working, someone said, half joking. Morrison ignored the comment. Lisa, I want detailed analysis of their ships. Weapons, shields, propulsion, everything. I want to know what they can do and, more importantly, what they can't do. Paul, dig through every historical record we can find. I want to know how the Croventhi have fought in the past. What tactics they use, what makes them vulnerable. Sir, we only have 9 days, Paul reminded him. Then we'd better work fast. Morrison turned to the communications officer. Get me a secure line to the fleet commanders. All of them. I don't care where they are or what they're doing. I want everyone online in 1 hour. As the officer hurried to comply, Lisa moved closer to Morrison, lowering her voice. Sir, what are you thinking? Morrison watched the Croventhi fleet on the display. Those thousands of ships arranged in their neat, predictable patterns. I'm thinking that in all of human history, we've never been very good at doing what we're told. Especially when someone threatens us. Are we really going to fight them? We're going to do more than fight them, Lisa. We're going to teach them why you don't pick fights with a species that's been perfecting the art of war since we learned to throw rocks at each other. Over the next 9 days, humanity prepared for war in ways the Croventhi couldn't imagine. There were no massive fleet movements, no obvious military buildups. To outside observers, it looked like humanity might actually be considering surrender. But in hidden shipyards, weapons manufacturing went into overdrive. In training facilities across human space, crews practiced maneuvers they'd never used in actual combat. And in secure command centers, officers pored over data, looking for weaknesses in an enemy that had never needed to worry about weaknesses before. Jake Morrison slept 4 hours during those 9 days. He attended dozens of briefings, reviewed hundreds of tactical plans, and spoke with every fleet commander personally. The strategy he was developing was risky, probably insane, and definitely not something any sane military would attempt. It was perfect. On the 9th day, Lisa found him in his office, staring at a picture of Earth on his wall. The Croventhi are broadcasting again, sir. They want our answer. Morrison nodded slowly. What's the status of our fleet? All ships are in position. All crews are ready. They're just waiting for your order, sir. And the surprise. Lisa allowed herself a small smile. Ready and waiting. The Croventhi don't have any idea what's coming. Morrison turned away from the picture of Earth and looked at his second-in-command. Lisa, we're about to start a war with an empire that's 50 times larger than us. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and by all conventional military analysis, we should lose. I know, sir, but we're not going to lose. Do you know why? Lisa thought about all the briefings, all the planning, all the unconventional tactics they'd developed over the past 9 days. Because we're not going to fight a conventional war. Exactly. Morrison headed for the door. Come on. Let's go tell the Croventhi Empire that humanity doesn't do surrender. As they walked through the corridors toward the command center, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. The Croventhi deadline had arrived, and their fleet was moving into position for their attack. 40,000 alien warships preparing to demonstrate the overwhelming force that had conquered 40 species before humanity. Morrison reached the command center and took his position at the central console. Around him, dozens of officers worked at their stations, coordinating with human forces across 17 star systems. Every eye in the room was on him, waiting for the order. Open a channel to the Croventhi fleet, Morrison commanded. The view screen flickered, and Admiral Vexthal's imposing figure appeared. Have you prepared your surrender? Morrison smiled. Admiral, humanity has considered your generous offer. The Croventhi weren't the only ones watching humanity's defiance with interest. Across the galaxy, dozens of species monitored the confrontation through long-range sensors and communication intercepts. Most had faced the Empire themselves at some point in their history. All of them had surrendered. The Yalith Confederacy, a loose alliance of 6 species that had survived Croventhi aggression through tribute and careful diplomacy, called an emergency council meeting. Their observation post had recorded everything from humanity's initial contact with the Empire to General Morrison's defiant response. "They're going to fight," Ambassador Kelleth said, his 3-fingered hands trembling slightly. "These humans are actually going to fight the Croventhi fleet. It's suicide," another counselor responded. "The Empire will crush them in hours, maybe days if the humans are lucky. Should we offer assistance? Sanctuary for refugees?" Kelleth made a gesture that translated roughly to uncertainty. "We should observe. If the humans survive the first engagement, perhaps there will be something to discuss. Until then, we wait." On the observation deck of the human warship Vengeance, Captain Danny Fletcher stood with his arms crossed, studying the star field ahead. His ship was one of humanity's newer designs, a destroyer-class vessel that measured 400 meters from bow to stern. It wasn't the biggest ship in the fleet, but it was fast, heavily armed, and crewed by people who knew exactly what they were doing. Lieutenant Amy Walsh joined him at the viewport, carrying a data pad that glowed with technical specifications. Amy was the ship's weapons officer, a woman in her late 20s who had graduated top of her class at the Naval Academy. She was also the person Danny trusted most when it came to creative ways of destroying enemy vessels. "We've finished the analysis on their shield systems," Amy announced, pulling up holographic displays that floated between them. "The Croventhi use a rotating frequency modulation. Basically, their shields constantly shift through different energy wavelengths. It makes them incredibly effective against directed energy weapons like lasers or particle beams." Danny studied the data carefully. Amy grinned. "But shields that are designed to deflect energy don't do well against solid objects. Their technology is built to scatter or absorb energy attacks. When something physical hits them, the shields don't know how to respond properly. So, kinetic weapons?" "Exactly. Our railguns accelerate tungsten rods to 0.3 light speed. That's not energy, that's mass and momentum. Their shields might slow the projectiles down a little, but they won't stop them. It would be like trying to stop a bullet with a flashlight." Danny nodded slowly, pieces clicking together in his mind. "What about their offensive capabilities? Their plasma cannons?" Amy switched displays showing detailed scans of Croventhi weapon systems. "That's the really interesting part. Their plasma weapons operate at temperatures we were using 200 years ago. We've analyzed the energy signatures from their test firings. Our current hull plating can withstand dozens of direct hits before we'd even need to worry about internal damage. They've been fighting primitives for so long, they haven't needed to upgrade their weapons." "Exactly. Why improve your technology when everything you fight can't even scratch your ships?" Amy looked almost excited now. "Captain, based on this analysis, we have a significant tactical advantage. Our weapons can hurt them badly, and their weapons can barely touch us." "Don't get overconfident," Danny warned, though he felt the same excitement building. "They still have numbers on their side. 50-1 odds means even if we're better equipped, they can overwhelm us through sheer volume of fire. That's why we're not fighting fair, right?" Danny smiled. "Right. Have the crew run through the ambush protocols again. I want everyone sharp when the time comes." Across human space, similar conversations were happening on every warship in the fleet. Engineers worked around the clock, not upgrading systems but manufacturing ammunition. Specifically, they were building railgun projectiles, thousands of tungsten rods, each one aerodynamically shaped and magnetically accelerated to velocities that made them deadlier than most missiles. The ammunition factories on Mars ran 24 hours a day, their furnaces glowing red as they processed raw materials into weapons. Workers moved in shifts, sleeping in bunks near the production line so they could maximize output. Everyone understood what was at stake. Meanwhile, on Earth, Ambassador Carl Wright was having a very different kind of meeting. The Yalith Confederacy had sent a delegation under the pretense of offering diplomatic assistance. In reality, they wanted to understand why humanity was choosing what appeared to be collective suicide. Carl met them in a conference room overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. He was a tall man in his 50s, with gray hair and the kind of calm demeanor that came from decades of negotiations. He'd represented humanity in trade disputes, territorial agreements, and cultural exchanges. This was his first potential extinction event. "Ambassador Wright, thank you for seeing us on such short notice," Kelleth began. The Yalith looked vaguely reptilian, with scaled skin and large eyes that could see into the infrared spectrum. We wanted to discuss the current situation with the Creventhi Empire. Of course, Carl said, gesturing for them to sit. Can I offer you anything? Water? We have some Yalith nutrient supplements if you'd prefer. No, thank you. Calith settled into a chair designed for his anatomy. Ambassador, we must speak plainly. Your species has rejected the Creventhi ultimatum. Do you understand what this means? Carl poured himself a glass of whiskey, noting how the Yalith delegation watched the amber liquid with fascination. To their biology, alcohol was a deadly poison. To humans, it was something you drank while discussing possible extinction. It means war, Carl said simply. It means annihilation, Kelith corrected. The Creventhi Empire has crushed every species that opposed them for 3,000 years. Their fleet is 50 times larger than yours. Your military technology, while impressive for a young species, cannot match 3 millennia of imperial development. You surrendered to them, didn't you? Carl asked, taking a sip of his whiskey. Kelith's scales rippled in what might have been embarrassment. The Yalith Confederacy chose survival over pride. We pay tribute, we follow their trade restrictions, and in return we are allowed to exist. It is not ideal, but we endure. And you think humanity should do the same. We think humanity should survive. There is no shame in acknowledging superior force. Carl set down his glass and leaned forward. Ambassador Kelith, let me tell you something about humans. We're not warriors because we're naturally aggressive or because we love violence. We're warriors because we're terrified. Terrified of extinction, of subjugation, of being helpless. That fear has driven us for thousands of years. Fear should make you cautious, not reckless. You'd think so, wouldn't you? Carl smiled. But here's the thing about humans. When we're afraid, we don't freeze, we attack. Every weapon we've ever created, every tactical doctrine, every military innovation came from looking at a threat and thinking, how do I kill that before it kills me? We've been preparing for this war since we were throwing rocks at predators on the African plains. Kelith exchanged glances with his fellow delegates. But the numbers matter in conventional warfare, Carl interrupted. This isn't going to be conventional. The Creventhi have been fighting species that surrendered after seeing their fleet size. They've never faced an opponent that fought back with everything they had. They've never faced humans. You're talking about tactics, strategy. These things cannot overcome such a massive numerical disadvantage. Carl finished his whiskey and stood, walking to the window. Outside, he could see ships moving through Earth's orbital space, preparing for deployment. Ambassador, do you know what makes humans different from most species? We fight each other, constantly, for resources, for territory, for ideas, sometimes just because we're bored. We fought thousands of wars against opponents who were just as smart, just as well-equipped, just as motivated as we were. We learned to be creative because our enemies were creative. We learned to be ruthless because our enemies were ruthless. The Creventhi are not human opponents. No, they're easier. They've spent 3,000 years beating up species that couldn't fight back. They've forgotten how to adapt, how to innovate under pressure. They show up, flex their muscles, and everyone surrenders. It's made them predictable. Kelith stood as well, his posture suggesting agitation. Ambassador Wright, I came here hoping to convince your species to reconsider. Instead, I find confidence bordering on delusion. I hope for humanity's sake that your military commanders are more realistic than your diplomats. Carl smiled. Ambassador, my military commanders are the ones who told me all this. They're excited, actually. Do you know what General Morrison said when he saw the analysis of the Creventhi fleet? What? He said it looked like a training exercise. Too easy to be real. After the Yalith delegation left, clearly disturbed, Carl contacted Morrison on a secure channel. The general appeared on screen looking tired but energized. How'd the meeting go? Morrison asked. They think we're insane. They're probably starting to take bets on how long we'll last. Good, let them underestimate us. Everyone else will too. Morrison. The Creventhi fleet emerged from hyperspace exactly on schedule, appearing at the edge of the Titan system like a swarm of metal locusts. 40,000 warships ranging from massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed Earth's largest cities to sleek destroyers designed for rapid strikes. They arranged themselves in perfect geometric formations, a display of military precision that had intimidated countless species before humanity. Admiral Vexthal stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Sovereign Wrath, and surveyed the tactical displays with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to standard protocol. The human colony world of Titan lay ahead, a small settlement of perhaps 50,000 inhabitants. It would be the first of many human worlds to fall. Status report, Vexthal commanded. His tactical officer, a younger Croventhi named Kresh, gestured to the holographic display. All fleet elements in position, Admiral. We have achieved optimal attack formation, scanning for human defensive forces. And, Kresh hesitated, Admiral, sensors detect only 12 human vessels. They appear to be destroyer-class ships positioned in orbit around the colony world. No fleet support, no reinforcements in range. Vexthal studied the display, his forearms crossing in a gesture of contempt. 12 ships against 40,000. Are they attempting a symbolic resistance? Unknown, Admiral. The human vessels are maintaining position but have not powered weapons or shields. Perhaps they're preparing to surrender. Vexthal activated his communication systems. Human vessels, this is Admiral Vexthal of the Croventhi Empire. You have one final opportunity to evacuate the colony peacefully. Stand down your vessels and... Croventhi Fleet, this is Captain Danny Fletcher of the Terran warship Vengeance. A human voice interrupted. We're not standing down. We're not evacuating, and we're definitely not surrendering. If you want Titan, you're going to have to take it. Vexthal's expression darkened. Then you will die for nothing. All Vanguard units advance and destroy those vessels. Make it quick. 300 Croventhi ships broke formation and accelerated toward the 12 human defenders. It was overwhelming force for such a small target, but Vexthal wanted to make a statement. The faster this battle ended, the faster other human colonies would surrender. On the bridge of the Vengeance, Danny Fletcher watched the enemy ships approach with calm focus. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with practiced efficiency. Amy Walsh monitored the weapon systems, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. Enemy fleet closing to weapons range in 90 seconds, Amy reported. Plasma cannons are charging. Good, Danny said quietly. Let them get close. How's our cloak holding? Stable. They still don't see the others. Danny allowed himself a small smile. All ships, this is Fletcher. Wait for my mark. Let them get right on top of us. The Croventhi Vanguard closed the distance rapidly, their formations tight and disciplined. To their sensors, there were only 12 human ships ahead, sitting helpless in space. It would be a massacre exactly as Doctrine demanded. 50 seconds to weapons range, 30 seconds, 10 seconds. All ships decloak now, Danny commanded. Weapons free, fire at will. 800 human warships appeared simultaneously. They emerged from behind asteroids, from within debris fields, from the shadows of Titan's moons. Advanced stealth technology, perfected through decades of submarine warfare and spy satellite development, had hidden them completely from Croventhi sensors. The ambush was perfect. On the Sovereign Wrath, alarm klaxons suddenly filled the command deck. Kresh stared at his displays in horror as hundreds of new contacts appeared. Admiral, multiple hostile contacts. Hundreds of them. That's impossible, Vexthal snarled. Where did they come from? He didn't get an answer. The human fleet opened fire. Railgun rounds crossed the distance between fleets in seconds. Tungsten projectiles, each one accelerated to 30% of light speed, tore through Croventhi shields like they weren't even there. The shields tried to deflect the incoming fire as they were designed to do with energy weapons. But kinetic energy wasn't something they could redirect or absorb. The rounds simply punched through and struck hull plating. Croventhi ships began exploding. Not one at a time, but dozens simultaneously. Each human destroyer carried multiple railgun batteries, and each battery could fire several times per minute. The volume of fire was devastating. Shields are ineffective, Kresh reported, his voice rising in panic. The human weapons are bypassing our defenses. All ships, combat dispersal, Vexthal ordered. Break formation and engage independently. But dispersal took time, and time was something the Croventhi Vanguard didn't have. Human missile swarms followed the railgun barrages. Thousands of guided projectiles that weaved through space on intercept courses. Croventhi point defense systems engaged, designed to shoot down energy-based torpedoes. They barely scratched the human missiles. The missiles were armored. They could take multiple hits and keep coming. They could adjust their courses mid-flight. They could break into smaller submunitions that scattered across a wider area. Human military doctrine had been developed against opponents who had similar defensive capabilities. So every weapon was designed to overcome countermeasures. The Croventhi Vanguard lasted 8 minutes before Vexthal ordered a retreat. 300 ships had entered the engagement. 117 made it out. On the Vengeance, Amy checked her tactical display and let out a long breath. Confirmed kills 183 enemy vessels. Probable kills another 23. Our casualties are minimal, sir. 3 ships with moderate damage. 1 destroyer that took a direct hit to their engine section, but they're stable. Danny nodded, forcing himself to remain calm, even as adrenaline surged through his system. All ships cease fire and reform. Don't pursue. We made our point. Sir, the main Creventhi fleet is holding position, the sensor officer reported. They're not advancing. They're trying to figure out what just happened, Danny said. Let them think about it. Lisa, damage assessment across the fleet. I want repair crews on those damaged ships immediately. As his crew worked, Danny allowed himself a moment to process what they'd just accomplished. Humanity had faced the mighty Creventhi Empire in open combat and won decisively. Not through superior numbers or overwhelming technology, but through tactics, strategy, and the kind of creative thinking that came from centuries of fighting peer opponents. On the Sovereign Wrath, Vextal stared at the tactical displays in disbelief. Nearly 200 ships destroyed in minutes. The humans had been hiding, waiting, using stealth technology the Empire didn't even know existed. And their weapons had cut through Creventhi defenses like they were nothing. Analysis, Vextal demanded. How did they penetrate our shields? Kresh worked frantically at his console. Admiral, their primary weapons appear to be kinetic projectiles. Solid matter accelerated to extreme velocities. Our shields are calibrated for energy weapons and weren't designed to stop physical objects moving at those speeds. And the missiles? Conventional warheads, but heavily armored and equipped with sophisticated guidance systems. Our point defense couldn't track them effectively. Vextal slammed one of his 4 fists against the command console. 3,000 years of military dominance and we're defeated by projectile weapons? Technology we abandoned millennia ago. The humans appear to have refined kinetic weaponry to an extreme degree, Kresh said carefully. And their tactics were unexpected. They used ambush, concealment, overwhelming firepower at close range. Nothing in our tactical database prepared us for this approach. Because no one has ever tried to hide from us before, Vextal said bitterly. Every species we've conquered saw our fleet and surrendered. These humans saw our fleet and planned an ambush. Orders, Admiral? Vextal considered his options. He still had over 39,000 ships. Even with the losses in the vanguard, he commanded overwhelming numerical superiority. But those 12 human ships had suddenly become 800, and they destroyed nearly 200 Creventhi vessels without taking significant casualties themselves. We withdraw to the edge of the system and reassess, Vextal decided. Send word to the Supreme Council. Tell them we need more ships, different tactics, and better intelligence on human capabilities. This isn't going to be the easy conquest we anticipated. Across the galaxy, species that had been monitoring the confrontation watched in stunned amazement. The Yalith Confederacy called an emergency session. The recordings were analyzed frame by frame, trying to understand what had just happened. They won, Kelith said quietly, staring at the battle replay. The humans actually won. They ambushed a vanguard force, another counselor corrected. The main Creventhi fleet is still intact. But they won, Kelith repeated. No one has ever defeated Creventhi ships in open combat. Not in 3,000 years, and the humans did it in 8 minutes. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. If humanity could defeat the Creventhi, what did that mean for the rest of the galaxy? What did it mean for species like the Yalith, who had surrendered without fighting? On Earth, General Morrison watched the battle reports with grim satisfaction. The strategy had worked perfectly. The Creventhi had expected a conventional engagement, and humanity had given them. The Battle of Titan sent shockwaves through the known galaxy. Within hours, every spacefaring species had obtained copies of the engagement recordings. Within days, those recordings were being analyzed by military strategists across hundreds of worlds. The Creventhi Empire, undefeated for 3 millennia, had been bloodied by a species most civilizations had barely heard of. On the Creventhi throne world of Krav Prime, the Supreme Council convened an emergency session. The council chamber was vast, designed to display the Empire's power and grandeur. Statues of ancient conquerors lined the walls, and the ceiling displayed a map of Creventhi territory that spanned across dozens of star systems. That map had been growing steadily for 3,000 years. Until now, Admiral Vexthal stood before the council, his career in shambles. He had expected to report a quick victory and the surrender of 17 human systems. Instead, he was explaining how he'd lost nearly 200 ships in 8 minutes. "You retreated," the Supreme Counselor said, his voice cold with contempt. "Against a force 1/50th your size, you withdrew." "The humans fight unlike any species we have encountered," Vexthal said, keeping his voice steady. "They used ambush tactics, stealth technology we could not detect, and weapons specifically designed to bypass our defensive systems. My vanguard force was destroyed before they could properly engage. Then you should have committed more ships." "With respect, Supreme Counselor, I would have lost more ships. The humans were prepared for us. They knew our tactics, our formations, our weapons capabilities. We knew nothing about theirs." The council members exchanged glances. This was unprecedented. The Creventi Empire fought wars by showing up with overwhelming force and waiting for the inevitable surrender. They didn't face opponents who studied them, who prepared, who fought back intelligently. "What do you recommend?" another counselor asked. "Send a larger fleet, 100,000 ships minimum. Establish multiple forward bases to cut off human supply lines. Force them to fight a war of attrition where our numerical advantage cannot be overcome by tactics alone." The Supreme Counselor considered this. "You will have your ships, Admiral. Do not fail us again." Back on Earth, General Morrison was dealing with his own challenges. The victory at Titan had bought humanity time, but it had also made the Creventi take them seriously as a threat. The next engagement would be much harder. Lisa Grant entered his office with fresh intelligence reports. "Sir, Creventi fleet movements suggest they're amassing forces for a major offensive. We're tracking at least 80,000 ships moving toward our space. Double what they sent the first time," Morrison noted. "They're adapting. What about our forces?" "All fleet elements are operating at combat readiness. But sir, we lost 3 ships at Titan and damaged several others. If they send 80,000 ships, we can't win another straight fight even with ambush tactics." Morrison stood and walked to the holographic star map that dominated one wall of his office. "Then we don't fight straight. Show me their supply routes." Lisa pulled up the data. The Creventi Empire was vast, but that size came with logistical challenges. Every ship needed fuel, ammunition, food for its crew. Those supplies came from rear area bases traveling along predictable routes to the front lines. "There," Morrison said, pointing to a cluster of supply convoys. "They need to keep their fleet supplied if they want to sustain a long campaign." "What if those supplies never arrived? Hit-and-run raids?" "More than that. I want to make it impossible for them to operate in our space. Every convoy attacked, every supply base harassed, every patrol ambushed. We can't match their numbers, but we can make sure those numbers don't matter." Over the next month, humanity launched a campaign of asymmetric warfare that bewildered the Creventi military command. Small strike groups of human ships would appear without warning, hit supply convoys or isolated patrol groups, and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. Human Marines boarded Creventi stations, not to capture them but to plant surveillance devices and sabotage equipment. Captain Danny Fletcher became something of a legend during this period. The vengeance seemed to be everywhere at once, striking across a dozen different star systems. In reality, Danny was carefully selecting targets based on intelligence reports and moving his ship through little-used jump routes that kept him ahead of Creventi response forces. "Contact: 3 Creventi supply ships escorted by 2 destroyers," Amy Walsh reported from her weapons station. They'd been hiding in the shadow of a gas giant for 6 hours waiting for this convoy. "Range? 2 million kilometers in closing. They're following the standard shipping lane, completely predictable." Danny nodded. The Creventi were creatures of habit, following doctrine even when that doctrine had proven vulnerable. It was a weakness humanity exploited ruthlessly. "Wait until they're past the moon," Danny ordered. "I want them silhouetted against the planet when we hit them." The convoy moved slowly, their crews probably bored from weeks of uneventful supply runs. The Creventi military had spread across such a vast area that most ships went months without seeing combat. They had no reason to expect an attack here, deep in what should have been safe territory. The Vengeance decloaked directly behind the convoy and opened fire. Railgun rounds tore through the supply ship's unarmored hulls, and the two escort destroyers barely had time to raise shields before missiles slammed into them. The entire engagement lasted 90 seconds. All targets destroyed, Amy reported. No survivors detected. Jump us out, Danny ordered. Next waypoint is the refueling station at Sector 12. Intelligence says they store antimatter there. Should make a nice firework display. This pattern repeated across human space and beyond. Croventhi forces found themselves constantly harassed, their supply lines disrupted, their patrols ambushed. They controlled space during the day, but at night, human ships owned the darkness. The psychological effect was devastating. Croventhi crews began refusing assignments to human space. Officers complained that they couldn't fight an enemy they couldn't pin down. Admiral Vexthal, now commanding the enlarged fleet of 80,000 ships, grew increasingly frustrated as his forces were nibbled to death by an enemy that refused to face him in open battle. "They're cowards," Vexthal snarled during a staff meeting. "They won't stand and fight." "With respect, Admiral," Kresh said carefully, "they're fighting very effectively. We've lost over 3,000 ships to these raids, and we've destroyed fewer than 50 human vessels in return. Our supply situation is becoming critical. Several forward bases are rationing fuel." "Then we force them to fight," Vexthal decided. "We attack their colonies directly. When we threaten their civilians, they'll have to defend them in open combat." But when Croventhi fleets moved toward human colonies, they found the worlds evacuated. The populations had been moved to fortified stations or deeper into human territory. What the Croventhi found were empty cities and booby-trapped infrastructure. One overeager Croventhi commander ordered his troops to occupy an abandoned mining station and lost 600 soldiers when hidden explosives detonated throughout the facility. Humanity was fighting the way they'd fought wars on Earth for thousands of years. Not with honor or glory, but with ruthless efficiency. Every tactic that worked was used repeatedly. Every weakness the enemy showed was exploited. There were no rules except victory. 3 months into the war, Ambassador Carl Wright received an unexpected communication from the Yalith Confederacy. Kelleth appeared on screen looking agitated. "Ambassador Wright, we need to speak urgently. The Croventhi have approached the Confederacy seeking assistance with their human problem." "And what did you tell them?" "We told them we were neutral." Kelleth paused. "But privately, many in the Confederacy are reconsidering certain assumptions." "What kind of assumptions?" "About the inevitability of Croventhi dominance. About whether resistance is futile. About what happens when a species that actually knows how to fight goes to war." Kelleth leaned forward. "Ambassador, we've been watching your conflict closely. The Croventhi are learning to fear you. Do you understand how significant that is?" Carl did understand. Fear was a weapon, and humanity was wielding it masterfully. "What do you want from us, Kelleth?" "Information. Tactical analysis. Your species has done in 3 months what no one else has accomplished in 3,000 years. There are other species who pay tribute to the Empire, who suffer under their rule. If the Croventhi can be defeated, you want to know if you should join the war. We want to know if joining the war is even possible. Can the Empire actually be beaten, or are you simply delaying the inevitable?" Carl considered his response carefully. The Croventhi are used to fighting inferiors. They show up with big fleets, everyone surrenders, and they move on to the next conquest. But humans? We've been fighting wars against ourselves for thousands of years. Every dirty trick, every brutal tactic, every psychological weapon. We've used them all against opponents who were just as smart and ruthless as we were. That explains your success so far, but not whether you can win. Kelleth, here's what I know. 3 months ago, the Croventhi thought they were invincible. Today, they're afraid to patrol their own supply routes. Tomorrow, we'll make them regret ever hearing the word human. 6 months after the initial declaration of war, the Croventhi Supreme Council convened for what would become their most important session in centuries. The Grand Council chamber, built to celebrate 3,000 years of military dominance, now felt more like a tomb. The holographic map that had once shown steady imperial expansion now displayed something unprecedented. red zones where Creventhi forces refused to patrol without heavy escort. The Supreme Counselor stood before the assembled leadership, his forearms held in a posture that conveyed both authority and weariness. Admiral Vexthal, present your report on the human campaign. Vexthal rose, and many in the chamber noted how much the Admiral had aged in half a year. His armor plating looked dull, his movements less assured. The campaign has not proceeded as planned, he began, which was such an understatement that several counselors made sounds of derision. We have lost 93,000 vessels, Vexthal continued, his voice hardening. The humans have lost approximately 200 ships. Our supply lines are constantly disrupted. Our forward bases require permanent heavy protection, and our crews are suffering from psychological stress the medical staff describes as unprecedented. 93,000 ships, the Supreme Counselor repeated slowly, against a force that numbered 800 vessels at the start of this conflict. Explain how this is possible. The humans fight unlike any opponent we have ever faced, Vexthal said. They do not hold territory. They do not defend fixed positions. They strike without warning, from directions we do not expect, using tactics we have never encountered. When we move to engage them, they retreat. When we withdraw, they attack. They have turned our own size against us because a large fleet requires massive logistics support, and those support elements are vulnerable to raids. You are describing basic guerrilla warfare, one counselor said. Surely our military academies have prepared for such tactics. Our academies teach how to suppress rebellions among conquered populations, Vexthal replied. Not how to fight a peer opponent who employs those methods in open warfare. The humans have centuries of experience fighting wars of attrition against equals. They know exactly how to maximize casualties while minimizing their own losses. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Creventhi Empire had built its power on overwhelming force and technological superiority. When those advantages failed, they had no backup strategy. What are our options? The Supreme Counselor asked. We continue the war and accept that it will cost us hundreds of thousands of ships over several years. We might eventually win through sheer attrition, but the price would be catastrophic. Vexthal paused. Or we sue for peace. The chamber erupted in angry voices. The idea of the Creventhi Empire, undefeated for 3 millennia, asking for peace was almost unthinkable. But as the shouting subsided, a grim reality settled over the counselors. Pride was expensive, and they were running out of ships to pay the price. On Earth, General Morrison received the preliminary peace feeler through diplomatic channels. The Creventhi weren't offering surrender, but they were offering to talk. For the first time in 6 months, Morrison allowed himself to feel something like hope. They're ready to negotiate, he told his senior staff. That means we've won. Sir, they still have over 700,000 ships, Lisa Grant pointed out. We have 600. How is this winning? Because wars aren't won by who has more ships at the end, Lisa. They're won by who's willing to keep fighting. The Creventhi have lost 93,000 vessels trying to conquer 17 human systems. They're looking at those numbers and realizing that even if they eventually grind us down, the cost will destroy their empire. That's victory. Ambassador Carl Wright was chosen to lead the human delegation in peace talks. He met the Creventhi representatives on a neutral space station operated by the Yalith Confederacy. The negotiation chamber was circular, with species-appropriate seating for everyone involved. Carl noted that several other alien delegations were present as observers, including species that currently paid tribute to the Empire. The Supreme Counselor himself attended, which was unprecedented. He stood across from Carl, all 4 arms crossed in a gesture that somehow conveyed both authority and grudging respect. Ambassador Wright, the Creventhi Empire is prepared to offer terms for ending hostilities. The Supreme Counselor began. We propose a cessation of military operations. Your species will retain control of its current territories. We will establish formal borders and mutual non-aggression guarantees. Carl listened carefully, noting what wasn't being said. The Creventhi were offering to leave humanity alone. But they weren't offering reparations or acknowledging defeat. They were trying to save face. Those terms are a good starting point, Carl said. But humanity has some additional requirements. You are in no position to make demand, one of the Creventhi delegates said sharply. Carl smiled. Actually, we're in an excellent position. You started a war of extermination against us. We've spent 6 months making you regret that decision. And based on your casualty reports, continuing this war will bankrupt your empire within 2 years. So yes, we're going to make demands. The Supreme Counselor raised a hand to silence his delegate. What do you want? First, full reparations to every species you've conquered or subjugated over the last 3,000 years. You've built your empire on exploitation. Time to pay that debt. Impossible. The economic cost would be catastrophic. Carl interrupted. Not as catastrophic as losing another 100,000 ships. Second demand. You will reduce your military to defensive forces only. No more fleets designed for conquest. No more intimidation campaigns against weaker species. You ask us to dismantle our entire strategic posture, the Supreme Counselor said. I'm asking you to stop being galactic bullies. Third demand, and this one is non-negotiable. Any future acts of aggression by the Creventhi Empire against any species will result in humanity treating your entire empire as a live-fire training range. We will hunt your ships for sport. We will turn your space into a graveyard, and we will enjoy doing it. The chamber went deathly silent. Several alien observers made sounds of shock or approval, depending on their relationship with the Empire. The Supreme Counselor stared at Carl with an expression that was difficult to read. You would threaten the entire Creventhi Empire? Not a threat, Carl said calmly. A promise. You came to human space expecting easy prey. Instead, you found predators. Now you know what we're capable of. Push us again and we'll show you exactly how creative humans can get when it comes to violence. The Supreme Counselor was quiet for a long moment. Then surprisingly, he made a gesture that resembled a human nod. Your terms are acceptable. But I would know one thing, Ambassador. Your species is young, barely 400 years in space. How did you become so effective at warfare? Carl leaned back in his chair. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years, Supreme Counselor. Every weapon, every tactic, every psychological technique we used against you, we learned by fighting opponents who were just as smart, just as well-equipped, and just as motivated as we were. You spent 3,000 years conquering primitives who surrendered the moment they saw your fleet. We spent that same time perfecting the art of killing each other. A brutal history. Maybe. But it prepared us for threats like you, and it taught us that survival isn't about being the strongest or the most numerous. It's about being the most adaptable, the most creative, and the most willing to do whatever it takes to win. The peace treaty was signed 3 days later. The Creventhi Empire agreed to all of humanity's terms, including reparations to subjugated species and military reductions. News of the treaty spread across the galaxy within hours, and the implications were staggering. The undefeatable Creventhi Empire had been forced to make peace by a species 1/50th their size. Every civilization that had surrendered without fighting now looked at their decision with new eyes. Every oppressed species saw a new possibility. The galaxy's power structure had shifted in ways that would take decades to fully understand. On Earth, celebrations erupted across the planet. Humanity had faced extinction and survived. More than survived, they'd won. In the Unified Defense Command Center, Morrison stood with his senior staff, watching news feeds from around human space. People were dancing in the streets, holding impromptu parties, crying with relief. 6 months ago, they'd all faced potential annihilation. Now they were alive, free, and victorious. We did it, Lisa said quietly. We actually did it, Morrison nodded. We proved something important today, not just to the Creventhi, but to every species watching. Humanity isn't the biggest, isn't the oldest, isn't the most advanced. But we're the most experienced at the one thing that matters when it all goes bad. Fighting. What happens now? Paul Stevens asked. The other empires watched us beat the Creventhi. Some of them will want to test us, see if we got lucky. Let them try, Morrison said. We've got 600 battle-hardened ships crewed by people who just spent 6 months learning how to fight an empire. Anyone who wants to take us on is welcome to become our next training exercise. 3 months after the peace treaty, Captain Danny Fletcher stood on the observation deck of the Vengeance, now stationed at humanity's newest colony in former Creventhi space. The treaty had given humanity some